Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're embarking on an epic journey, a whirlwind tour through the history of the United States of America. From its earliest inhabitants to its modern-day complexities, this is a story of exploration, revolution, conflict, and innovation. So grab your popcorn because this is going to be a ride. Our story begins long before the first European ships dotted the horizon. For thousands of years, diverse and sophisticated Native American societies thrived across the continent. From the cliff dwellings of the ancestral Pueblones in the southwest to the vast trade networks of the Mississippian culture, these peoples developed unique languages, governments, and traditions. Living in harmony and sometimes conflict with the land and each other. Their history is the foundational chapter of the American story. Then, in the late 15th century, the world changed forever. Christopher Columbus's voyages, sponsored by Spain, accidentally connected to worlds, initiating what's known as the Columbian Exchange. This wasn't just an exchange of goods like potatoes and horses. It was an exchange of ideas, cultures, and tragically diseases that devastated native populations. Soon, the Spanish, French, Dutch, and English all arrived, eager to claim a piece of this new world for God, gold, and glory. The English, in particular, established a firm foothold along the Atlantic coast. In 1607, Jamestown, Virginia, became the first permanent English settlement, a tough, gritty start marked by struggle and survival. Further north, the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth in 1620, seeking religious freedom. Over the next century and a half, 13 distinct colonies developed, each with its own character. New England was defined by its puritanical values and merchant trade. The middle colonies were a diverse melting pot of cultures and religions, and the southern colonies built an agrarian economy, dependent crucially and tragically on the labor of enslaved Africans, a system that would cast a long dark shadow over the nation's future. By the mid-1700s, a new identity was brewing. The colonists, who were generations removed from England, began to see themselves less as British subjects and more as, Americans. Tensions flared after the French and Indian War. Britain, deep in debt, decided the colonies should help pay for their own defense. They imposed a series of taxes, like the Stamp Act and the Tea Act. But for the colonists, it wasn't just about the money. It was about a principle: no taxation without representation. Protests erupted. The Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party were not just isolated incidents. They were flashpoints of a growing rebellion. In 1775, the shot heard round the world at Lexington and Concord ignited the American Revolutionary War. It was a daunting fight, a ragtag militia against the most powerful army in the world, but fueled by the leadership of George Washington and the powerful ideals articulated by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence in 1776, that all men are created equal with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The colonists persevered. With crucial help from France, they secured a victory at Yorktown in 1781, winning their independence. Now came the hard part: building a nation. The first attempt, the Articles of Confederation, was too weak. The federal government couldn't even raise taxes. So, in 1787, the nation's leaders gathered in Philadelphia. They hammered out a new framework, the United States Constitution. It was a revolutionary document, creating a republic with a system of checks and balances among three branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. A Bill of Rights was soon added, guaranteeing essential freedoms like speech, religion, and the press. George Washington was inaugurated as the first president, setting the precedent for the peaceful transfer of power. The young nation began to expand. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803, orchestrated by President Thomas Jefferson, doubled the size of the country overnight. This fueled a belief in manifest destiny, the idea that the United States was divinely destined to expand from coast to coast. Pioneers in covered wagons headed west on the Oregon Trail, seeking land and opportunity. This expansion, however, came at a terrible cost to Native American tribes who were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands, most notably on the tragic Trail of Tears. As the nation grew, so did its deepest division: slavery. The industrializing North and the agrarian South were on a collision course. A series of compromises, like the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850, tried to keep the peace, but they were just temporary fixes. The abolitionist movement gained strength, and tensions reached a boiling point with the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, who opposed the expansion of slavery. Fearing their way of life was under threat, 11 Southern states seceded from the Union, forming the Confederacy. The Civil War, which began in 1861, was the bloodiest conflict in American history. It was a war fought not just to preserve the Union, but to decide the very soul of the nation. Battles like Gettysburg and Antietam left a devastating human toll. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, transforming the war's purpose and declaring slaves in Confederate territory to be free. In 1865, the Union emerged victorious, but the nation was scarred, and President Lincoln was assassinated just days after the war's end. The war did settle two things: the United States was one indivisible nation, and slavery was abolished with the 13th Amendment. The period that followed, known as Reconstruction, was a time of great promise and great failure. The government attempted to rebuild the South and integrate nearly 4 million newly freed African Americans into society, but the efforts were met with fierce and violent resistance. By the late 1870s, Reconstruction had ended, and the South implemented Jim Crow laws, a brutal system of segregation and disenfranchisement that would last for nearly a century. As the 19th century closed, America entered the Gilded Age. It was a time of massive industrialization, technological innovation, and vast fortunes. Tycoons like Andrew Carnegie in steel, John D. Rockefeller in oil, and J.P. Morgan in finance built empires. Railroads stitched the country together. Cities swelled with factories, and millions of immigrants poured in from Europe and Asia, seeking the American dream. But this gilded prosperity hid deep social problems, horrific working conditions, child labor, and extreme poverty in urban slums. This led to the Progressive Era, a period of widespread social activism and political reform. Reformers known as muckrakers exposed corruption. Activists fought for women's suffrage, leading to the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. The government passed laws to regulate big business, protect consumers, and conserve natural resources. In 1917, after years of trying to stay neutral, the United States entered World War I. The Great War catapulted America onto the global stage as a major military and economic power. The post-war era, the Roaring Twenties, was a decade of economic prosperity, cultural dynamism, jazz music filled the air, and consumer culture boomed. But the party came to a crashing halt in 1929 with the stock market crash, plunging the nation and the world into the Great Depression. It was the worst economic crisis in modern history. Millions lost their jobs and homes. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, or FDR, was elected in a landslide, promising a New Deal for the American people. His programs dramatically expanded the role of the federal government, creating Social Security, regulating banks, and putting people to work on public projects. Just as the nation was recovering, the world was once again plunged into war. The rise of fascism in Europe and Japanese expansionism in Asia led to World War II. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 unified a shocked nation and drew the U.S. into the conflict. The American home front mobilized on an unprecedented scale, with Rosie the Riveter becoming a symbol of women joining the workforce. American industry became the arsenal of democracy, and millions of soldiers fought in Europe and the Pacific. The war ended in 1945 after the use of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ushering in the nuclear age and leaving the United States as one of the world's two superpowers. Alongside the Soviet Union, what followed was the Cold War, a decades-long ideological struggle between American-led democracy and capitalism and Soviet-led communism. It was a tense standoff, marked by a nuclear arms race, the Red Scare at home, proxy wars in places like Korea and Vietnam, and the space race, which culminated in the incredible achievement of landing a man on the moon in 1969. Simultaneously, a second American Revolution was taking place at home, the Civil Rights Movement. Led by iconic figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and many others. African Americans and their allies used non-violent protests, sit-ins, and marches to dismantle the system of Jim Crow. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were landmark legislative victories, outlawing segregation and protecting the right to vote. The movement inspired other groups, including women, Latinos, Native Americans, and LGBTQ+ individuals, to fight for their own rights and equality. The late 20th century saw the turmoil of the Vietnam War, the Watergate scandal that brought down a president, and the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, which ended the Cold War and left the United States as the world's sole superpower. The 1990s were a period of economic growth and the rise of the digital age, with the internet transforming society in ways no one could have imagined. The 21st century began with the traumatic shock of the September 11th attacks, which led to the War on Terror and long-term military engagements in Afghanistan and Iraq. The nation has since wrestled with issues like economic recession, debates over healthcare, and a renewed reckoning with its history of racial injustice. And that brings us, in a very broad sense, to today. The history of the United States is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of liberty and oppression, unity and division, triumph and tragedy. It is the story of a nation constantly striving and often struggling to live up to its founding ideals. It's a story that is still being written by all of us. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible historical journey. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss our next adventure. See you in the next video.